and welcome again to our Ahead of the Curve series at Infinity Exchange. We have a very exciting topic for you today. We're talking about rates arbitrage. This is something that's not really possible, although theoretically possible within crypto. And we're going to talk about how it works, rather maybe how it should work, and how it ties into what we're building as a protocol. So with that in mind, let's get right to it. Okay, first of all, arbitrage is basically a simple concept. It's basically centered around this idea of earning risk-free profit. And so the notion is that, I have, if the price of an asset is different in two different places, maybe I can buy and sell that asset, earning basically risk-free profit or a risk-free return. And again, there's many different types of arbitrage. In this case here, maybe there's one exchange that's selling Bitcoin for 24,000. There's another selling it for 25. You would then naturally buy it here and you would sell it there. And you'd buy it again here and sell it there and just kind of rinse and repeat, kind of go back and forth. And so that's how arbitrage works in a conventional, traditional sense. And that's, what we see more in the, let's call it the spot or futures markets. And that's how you see it there. In the interest rate world, however, it's much different. So let me just kind of set this up. Give me a moment here. Okay. So in the interest rate world, we have, two big protocols. We have Aave and Compound. And so, Aave's rates are 2%. Compound's rates are 7%. How do we implement arbitrage here? So the conventional wisdom would be that, hey, a rational person, you would lend USDC at, let's say with Compound at 7%. And then you would borrow USDC at Aave at 2%. So what does this look like? We have something kind of like that. Okay, so we would want to lend at 7%, and so we earn 7% yield, and then we would borrow at 2%, and we basically earn this kind of risk-free. So in a ideal world, that's how things would happen. The size or quantum of this arbitrage, what is it here? Basically 5%. Okay, so that's cool. Now let's look at how this works in practice. So I'll move that over there. Okay, so I basically want to lend. Let's start with 10 million. Deal with some big numbers. Okay, so I lend 10 million to Compound at 7%. What Compound does is they give me a receipt token of some sort. This receipt token is called a C token. So when I lend 10 million, I basically get the equivalent of C USDC. I get this token here. Okay, so that's what I get as a receipt. Basically, I could remove that for now. The idea is that USDC in its most basic form doesn't pay interest, but C USDC pays interest. And so, great. I deposit at 7, I get this receipt, that's fine. Now I have this token, this ERC20 token, and it conforms to the same standard as basically every other ERC20 token. And what can I do with this? Technically, I can transfer it to any other protocol. This is the standard allows us to transfer these tokens everywhere. The problem is that we need to look at what other protocols can accept or can understand this token. So let's look at what happens next. So we want to lend with Compound, and then we want to then borrow at Aave. Now to borrow at Aave, what do you need to do? You basically need to post some type of collateral. So, if you have wrapped Bitcoin or ETH or, some token, you can basically transfer that into Aave and then basically borrow against that position. That's not really arbitrage though, if I'm introducing like ETH or wrapped Bitcoin to the equation. When it comes to arbitrage, we basically want to deal with like the same currency, or we want to limit the number of variables at play. So ideally, I would want to take that token. I would want to take this token that I received here, this CUSD, this deposit token. Think of it just like a bank deposit. There's probably a better description for it, but it's like a deposit of some sort. So 10 million, I'll just simplify it. I take this deposit with Compound, I transfer it into Aave. Now that I have collateral with Aave, I can then go and borrow. So I'll take that. I'll borrow simply 10 million USDC. So I've transferred that in. I borrow 10 million USDC. I now take this USDC and I bring it all the way back, and I would lend again at 7%. So what we have here is, in fact, not this line, but that. And so in this case, I can basically iterate and repeat the cycle. I lend at 7% with Compound. I deposit that as collateral here with Aave. I then borrow at 2%, repeat and repeat and repeat. And that is arbitrage, ladies and gents. Okay, so that's kind of the process there. Okay, so that's cool. Now, let's look at other instruments here. Now, Compound in this example is paying 7%, but what are other kind of yield-bearing or yield-like instruments? And so you have effectively, lots of different kind of yield-like instruments. Aave and Compound, these are considered more like your risk-free protocol, so to speak. But what if you look at Aave? What if you look at Uniswap? Uniswap has LP positions. So Uniswap LP positions, if I'm an LP, I'm basically earning a fee on this position. It kind of looks and behaves like a bond or a similar type instrument. There is some principal exposure or some principal risk because of this impermanent loss. But basically, the hope is with LP tokens that they return an amount which is far and above that of the more kind of risk-free types of protocols. So you might have Uniswap up here at 13%, and ideally we could implement the arbitrage in exactly the same way. So you would enter into an LP position with Uniswap, you would earn 13%. You could then take that and put it as collateral with Aave, and then borrow at 2%, and then basically just extending kind of that, or increasing the magnitude of that arbitrage. Okay, so something kind of like that. So that's how you would kind of recursively or iteratively arbitrage between a Uniswap LP position and the risk-free borrowing rate on these protocols here. So if we could arbitrage, that's great. But the reality is that we can't do this. We can't actually arbitrage between the different protocols. And the reason for this is that Aave cannot take Compound's tokens as collateral, right? You cannot take Compound's tokens as collateral. So right here, this branch basically breaks. Compound similarly also can't take Aave tokens as collateral. Along another vein, could you take a Uniswap LP NFT position? Can you take a Curve LP position and post it as collateral with Aave? Like, no, you can't do that. So for that reason, this rates arbitrage starts to break down significantly. And so this leg is broken, this collateral leg is broken, and that leg is broken there as well. And that really starts to break down. The second step is that, or the second part of this rather, is that in DeFi, of course, lending protocols have two different rates. Aave and Compound, they have two different rates. They have basically your lending rate and your borrow rate. So Aave is not, you can't lend and borrow at 2%. You could lend and borrow, or rather, you could lend at 2% and borrow at 5%. With, let me get rid of these lines here. Compound, similarly, there's a bid offer on these rates. And so this arbitrage, which previously was between 2 and 7%, it's not quite there. It's more like, if there was one, it would be between here and there. So that's another reason, again. So reason number one, protocols can't take each other's deposit-like tokens as collateral. Reason number two, basically protocols have wide spreads, lending protocols have wide spreads, which, if the gap is sufficiently big, then, you can potentially monetize an arbitrage. But in reality, it doesn't really operate like that. In reality, we see Aave's rates kind of aligned with Compound to some degree. So how does infinity come into play here? All right, so let me just clean this up a little bit. So I mentioned Aave and Compound. The rates in reality are much closer together. So let's place them somewhere like that. And we now make room for infinity. Okay. So where infinity comes into play is firstly on the right side here. Infinity can take a whole new set of tokens as collateral. We can take your standard USDC, USDT, DAI, ETH, wrap Bitcoin, but in addition to that, we can take C tokens, basically Compound C tokens, Aave A tokens. We can take LP positions. We can take Uniswap, LP positions. We can take Curve LP positions as well. So we have a much, deeper and more robust risk management system that allows us to take these tokens as collateral. This helps to, fundamentally enable arbitrage. The next question is, where are the rates? And so is there a sufficient amount of arbitrage to implement it, whether or not it is possible? So let me just make room over here. Infinity. And for argument's sake, let's say that infinity's rates are 2%. Again, these could be anywhere, right? But for argument's sake, let's say they're 2%. So in this case here, what happens is that, again, you would deposit or lend with these other protocols, right? You lend with, say, Aave or Compound. You would then take that A token or C token, post it as collateral with infinity, and then borrow at 2%. And so you would just basically rinse and repeat this process. And so in that process, what happens is that infinity's rates would rise up to maybe this level here. And because you are borrowing from infinity, it then puts upward pressure on our rates. Because you are lending with Aave and Compound, it would maybe bring these rates down. And that iterative process, what happens is you're basically multiplying TVL, right? You're multiplying like this $10 million. So you would, if I just step back here, you would take 10 million, deposit here, borrow here. You'd create another 10 million. And again, it has that multiplicative process where basically TVL is just rapidly expanding. So again, we borrow from infinity. This drives our rates up to, let's just say here, the process of lending at Aave and Compound brings those rates down to here. And so that's kind of like a steady state now, all right? In this type of environment, infinity's rate is here at 6%. Aave's rate is here at 5% and 8%. And that's the beauty of arbitrage. So basically, once you've implemented arbitrage, you are earning kind of these high yields. Infinity, again, we only have one rate, and it's the same rate that you lend or borrow at. We do have some small fees, but for all intents and purposes, it's the underlying mechanic is a single rate. So at this point here, infinity's rates are somewhere between Aave and Compound. So if you're going to lend, any rational investor would lend with infinity versus lending with Aave or Compound. Any rational borrower would borrow with infinity versus borrowing at Aave or Compound. So what happens in this environment? It's TBD, who knows? Maybe the TVL would drop eventually simply because, how does a protocol with a wide spread compete against a protocol with no or kind of very minimal spread? What we should also see is as arbitragers basically, deposit or enter into LP positions with Uniswap and borrowing on Infinity, it should furthermore drive these rates down, and it should probably drive these rates up somewhere where there's a difference in these rates, and the difference is commensurate with or is equivalent to the amount of extra risk premium that I might be taking with Uniswap. So again, there is some principal exposure with Uniswap, and if I'm earning 2 to 3%, that is probably the market adjusted or the risk adjusted rate of return vis-a-vis kind of the risk-free borrowing rate, and that's what we expect to happen in reality. So there you have it. We covered interest rate arbitrage. Basically, you cannot do it today, or it's not easily done today with kind of your major protocols. The key stumbling blocks are, one, the collateral that today's lending protocols can take. And secondly, it is the bid offer or the wide spreads on today's lending protocols as well. How this, how this turns out for all of DeFi, or what this means for DeFi, we'll see what happens. But basically, we're excited to see some significant TVL growth as traders and arbitragers basically trade recursively between our protocol and other protocols. But there you have it. That's Rates Arbitrage. A lot of questions you might have. Please reach out on Twitter. Let us know your questions and how else we can make this easier for you. All right. Till then, we'll chat again